Red Hollow was a pause in the wind. It was not a town that invited stillness, but demanded it. The wind was the first and last thing a person knew of this place. It scoured the high desert of the New Mexico territory, carrying alkali dust that coated every windowsill and settled in the lines around every eye. The year was 1889, moving toward 1890, and the land was defined by what it lacked: water, softness, and forgiveness. What it had was distance, a sky so vast it pressed down on you, and a particular kind of grit, both in the air and in the people. The town itself was little more than two muddy ruts of a main street, bordered by false front buildings of sun-bleached wood. Its economy was built on the tough hides of cattle and the speculative dust from small, played-out mining claims. Now, a new sound carried on that wind, a rhythmic clanging from the east. The railroad was coming. That promise of steel and steam was a storm cloud on the horizon, promising rain to some and ruin to others. It was a promise that made greedy men move faster than the wind itself. May O'Rourke, at 22 years of age, understood the wind. She understood grit. She moved through the morning clutter of Bridget's eatery with a practiced economy, her steps stirring up the scent of stale coffee, bacon grease, and the metallic tang of rust that seemed to bleed from the very soil. She refilled heavy ceramic mugs for sour-faced ranchers and hopeful prospectors, her presence a quiet, steady thing in the loud room. Most folks in Red Hollow did not look at May directly. They looked past her, or through her, or at the small, pale mark on her left cheek. It was a scar, thin as a thread, pulling just slightly at the corner of her mouth. In a town of hard-faced men and sun-worn women, it was nothing. But Red Hollow had harsh standards for softness, and May, with her quiet ways and her refusal to crumble, had been given a name: Ugly May. The name was spoken in whispers, in careless asides, a casual cruelty that had followed her since she was a girl. May heard it. She always heard it. But her resilience was an internal thing, a spine made of quiet iron. She had goals that did not depend on the eyesight of others. Her first goal was the debt, the ledger book kept by her aunt. Her second goal was a small piece of land, somewhere upwind of the dust, where she could build something that was hers alone. Her most private goal, the one she kept folded away like a clean linen, was to one day be seen for the contents of her character, not the map of her face, beyond the eatery. She was also an apprentice, learning the difficult and sacred business of midwifery from Sister June, a skill that brought her into the quiet, vulnerable rooms of the town, places where names like hers did not matter. In the back kitchen, stirring a pot of thin stew, was her Aunt Bridget. Bridget O'Rourke was a woman carved from the same hard landscape as the town. Her face was a map of worries, her hands chapped and strong. She was strict, her voice often sharp, but her love for May was fierce and unspoken, buried beneath layers of duty and fear. The debt was to Horace Pike, and it hung over their small business like a vulture. Horace Pike himself was the opposite of the wind. Where the wind was chaotic, he was precise. Where the wind wore things down, he built himself up. He was the town banker, a land speculator, a man who wore a clean suit in a town of dust. He owned the bank, held the mortgages, and knew the railroad was coming long before the first spike was driven. He moved through Red Hollow with the predatory grace of a man who knows everyone's secrets, knows who is desperate, and knows exactly how much pressure to apply. His shadow was Elias Crow, the railroad foreman. Crow was a big man, loud and rough, the visible fist to Pike's quiet calculations. Together, they were a single entity of greed, their eyes fixed on the deeds and titles of Red Hollow. They intended to own the valley, every patch of scrub and every dry wash, before the first locomotive steamed into view. They represented a system, a modern hunger that was descending on the old, harsh West. Far from the clatter of the eatery and the scheming in the bank, another man watched the sky. Chayton Naiche was a man of about 29 years, a man who lived with the wind, not against it. He was Chiricahua Apache, and he moved through the canyons and mesas like a ghost, his presence known only when he wished it. He had a past that included a stint as an army scout, a past he had walked away from, seeking a life defined by his own terms, not by the orders of others. He was currently occupied with a small herd of horses, tough, deep-chested animals he was breeding to withstand the sudden, violent storms of the high desert. But his true purpose here, his deeper goal, was a hidden one. It was the shape of an old promise, a debt of honor he intended to pay, though he did not yet know to whom. He was a man living free, but bound tight to a single, unspoken oath. The fabric of Red Hollow was held together by other, tougher threads. Sheriff Calder was one. He was a man caught in the middle, trying to enforce a distant set of laws in a place that preferred its own rough justice. He balanced daily between the raw power of men like Pike and Crow and the stubborn, often contradictory needs of the townspeople. He was a man who saw too much and said too little, walking a fine line drawn in the dust. Then there was Sister June, who ran the small infirmary next to the sagging mission church. She was a woman of quiet faith and immense practicality, her hands as skilled with a suture needle as they were in prayer. She was May's teacher in midwifery, and perhaps the only person in town who saw May with perfect clarity, valuing her steady hands and compassionate heart above all else. Zeb Hollis was another fixture, a sharp-tongued cowboy who spent more time drinking at the eatery than working cattle. His words were often barbed, cutting through the lazy afternoon conversation. But beneath the cynicism was a bedrock of principle. Zeb might mock a man for his boots, but he would not stand by and watch a true injustice. He saw the world in black and white, and he did not like the gray shade of Horace Pike. And there was Old Man Toro, a farmer of Mexican descent, who lived on the edge of town, his small patch of beans and corn a miracle of irrigation and stubbornness. He understood the land, not as something to be owned, but as something to be read. He watched the clouds, felt the shift in the air, and knew the language of the storms better than any man in the territory. The atmosphere in Red Hollow was one of waiting. The air was taut, filled with the scent of dry wood, the iron of the coming rails, and the unspilled anxieties of the populace. The prose of the town was simple, its story written in concrete details, the grit under a fingernail, the splintered wood of a porch rail, the way the wind made the saloon sign squeak on its hinges, a sound like a small animal in pain. The pace of life was slow, measured by the sun, but underneath, a current was picking up speed. On May O'Rourke, another detail rested, often unseen, around her neck, tucked beneath the simple collar of her dress. She wore a silver locket. It was heavy, old, and tarnished at the edges. It had belonged to her mother. Selah, a woman May barely remembered, a woman the town whispered about, connecting her to the locket as a source of bad luck. The locket was hollow. May knew this because she could feel the faint shift of something inside it when she moved. She had never opened it. It felt like a betrayal, a prying into a past her Aunt Bridget refused to discuss. She simply wore it, a solid, cool weight against her skin, a connection to a mother she knew only as a whisper. Inside that silver shell, unknown to her, lay a small, folded piece of an old map, a secret sleeping against her heart. The themes of their lives were already laid down, the foundations of the trials to come. May's quiet fight for dignity against the loud voice of prejudice, the question of family, whether it was the one you were born into, like the prickly bond with Bridget, or one you might choose, a concept still foreign to her. The town itself struggled with justice, caught between the community's unwritten codes and the personal ethics of a few. This was not a place of erasing the past. The past was in the soil, in the scars, in the blood. This was a place of mending, of trying to build a future from the broken pieces of what had come before. May, cleaning a cup, felt the locket press against her collarbone and straightened her shoulders against the weight of the wind. The afternoon air turned traitor. It had been hot, a heavy, breathless heat that pressed the alkali dust down onto the planks of red hollow. Now, a strange, greenish-yellow light bled into the sky from the west. The wind, usually a constant companion, died completely. The silence that fell was thick and unnatural. May O'Rourke was walking back from Old Man Toro's farm, an empty soup pail swinging in her hand. He had read the sky earlier. His dark eyes narrowed. He had spoken a single word in Spanish, viento, but he had said it with a finality that scared her. She was halfway down the main street when she heard it. It was not a sound she recognized, but one her bones knew. A low, vibrating hum that seemed to come from the earth itself. Then a horse screamed. It was a sound of pure, animal terror, and it cut through the silence like a knife. Chaos erupted. May did not run for the eatery. She ran for the public root cellar, a reinforced pit dug behind the assay office. She grabbed the heavy steel triangle hanging by the door and beat it with the iron rod. The clang was desperate, thin against the rising groan of the atmosphere. She yelled, her voice raw. "Cellar! Get to the cellar now!" People spilled from the buildings, their faces pale and confused, looking at the sky. The yellow light was darker now, and the western horizon was boiling. A vast black cloud was descending, and from its belly, a ghostly white funnel was reaching for the ground. The hum became a roar, like 1,000 freight trains bearing down on their small, exposed town. May shoved people toward the heavy wooden doors of the cellar. "Go! Go!" She saw Zeb Hollis, sober for once, carrying a child. She saw Sister June, her face calm, directing 3 women inside. Then May saw the horse again, riderless this time, its eyes white as it galloped straight through the livery stable wall, vanishing in a crash of splintered wood. She looked toward the wind tower at the edge of town, the tower that pumped their meager water. A man was on the ground. He had been thrown. His horse was gone. He was too far from the cellar. He was not moving. "May, go!" Aunt Bridget yelled from the cellar steps, her voice cracking with fear. "Leave it!" May saw the man was Apache. The thought was immediate, a cold fact. The town's prejudice was a language she knew as well as English. He moved, just a small lift of his head. May turned from the safety of the cellar. The air was full of grit that stung like needles. A few people, huddled at the opening, watched her. Someone shouted. It was Mr. Henderson, the man from the dry goods store. He called her an ugly fool. He yelled that she was risking them all for nothing. May ignored the voice. The roar was deafening. She ran, her patched calico dress whipping around her legs. The first hailstone struck, a hard, cold volley, big as acorns. She kept her head down, her world reduced to the man on the ground and the groaning metal skeleton of the wind tower. She reached him. He was a stranger, lean and dark, dressed in worn leather. His eyes were closed, a line of blood tracing from his hairline into the dust. He was breathing in shallow, painful gasps. May put her hands on his side, the way Sister June had taught her, and felt the unnatural shift of broken ribs. The wind hit them like a physical blow, trying to peel them from the earth. May knew she could not carry him. She looked at the wind tower, its iron legs anchored deep in the rock. A heavy coil of rope lay at its base, thick hemp used for repairs. With fumbling, numb fingers, she uncoiled one end. She wrapped it twice around her own waist. Leaving slack, she tied the other end to the lowest cross brace of the tower. A lifeline. She crawled the 10 feet to the man, the rope playing out behind her. The sky was black. Hail hammered her back, bruising her through the thin cloth. Her hair, pulled loose from its bun, was instantly caked with mud. She grabbed the front of the man's shirt. Her hands shook violently from the cold and the terror, a tremor she could not control. But her eyes, fixed on the cellar door 50 yards away, were steady. She pulled. He was heavy, a dead weight. She braced her feet in the mud and pulled again, gaining an inch. The wind shrieked, a sound that felt like the world was tearing apart. She could see the faces in the cellar opening, pale ovals of fear. They were watching the ugliest girl in town, tied to a tower, fighting a tornado for a man they would have run out of town on any other day. She got him to the base of the tower, into the slight lee of the structure. She untied the rope from her waist and looped it under his arms. Securing it quickly, she would have to drag him. She pulled the rope over her shoulder and leaned into the task, her body screaming in protest. Inch by inch, she hauled him across the open ground, the hail now big as eggs, crashing around them, raising splashes of mud. They reached the cellar steps just as the main funnel struck the other end of the street. The sound was no longer a roar. It was an absence, a vacuum that sucked the breath from her lungs. She and the man tumbled down the earthen steps together, landing in a heap at the bottom as Zeb Hollis and Sheriff Calder slammed the heavy, reinforced doors shut and dropped the thick wooden bar. Darkness, absolute and suffocating. The cellar was packed, the air filled with the smell of damp earth, raw potatoes, and the sharp tang of human fear. May could hear someone praying, a fast, panicked whisper. People pressed away from her, away from the man she had dragged inside. She pushed herself up, her body a map of new pain. She needed to check on him. She crawled to where he lay. Sister June was suddenly there, a small lantern casting a weak, dancing light. She held it high. The man's eyes flickered open. He was looking at May. He was conscious, but barely. The earth above them exploded. The cellar bucked, throwing them against the wall. A sound of giant, splintering wood. A piece of the roof, a sheet of tin used for a patch, ripped free from the ceiling. It spun down into the small space, a deadly, flashing blade. May froze, looking up at it. The stranger moved. It was not a conscious act. It was a pure animal reflex. He was wounded, his body broken, but he lifted his arm. He did not shield his own face. He threw his forearm up and over May, his hand covering her neck, his body instinctively shielding her head as the tin crashed against the wall where her head had been, embedding itself in the packed earth. May stared at him, breathless, her skin tingling where his arm had covered her. He looked through her, his eyes unfocused. Seeing something far away, he breathed out a single, soft word, a name. It sounded like Sila. Then his head fell back against the potato sacks, and he was unconscious. May stayed frozen, the world roaring above, and that one strange word, a whisper of Gaelic in a hole in the ground, echoing in the darkness. When the sound finally stopped, the silence that replaced it was worse. It was a dead silence, heavy and absolute. After a long minute, Sheriff Calder and Zeb Hollis heaved the bar and pushed the doors open. The light that flooded in was gray and weak. Red Hollow was gone. The town she knew had been erased, replaced by a field of debris. The sky was a bruised, weeping purple. The warehouse was a pile of kindling. The livery stable was simply missing. Dazed cattle, survivors from the stock pens, wandered aimlessly through what had been the main street. May scrambled out, her heart in her throat, and ran toward the eatery. The front of the building was sheared off, the window and door frame gone, exposing the kitchen to the sky. Inside, she found her Aunt Bridget, pale and holding her arm against her chest. A heavy set of shelves, full of canned goods, had toppled onto her. Her hand and wrist were swelling, the pain sharp in her eyes. But she was alive. May looked toward the edge of town. Old Man Toro's small barn was gone. The roof lifted clean off, leaving only the stalls. Her training took over. She found Sister June, and together they began to move. They turned the infirmary, which had miraculously survived with only broken windows, into a center for the wounded. May, her hands now steady, found clean rags and splint wood. She bound her aunt's injured arm, her touch gentle but firm. They worked through the rest of the day, setting bones, stitching cuts, and offering comfort where there was nothing else to offer. By the next morning, the shock began to fade. replaced by the cold, hard reality of ruin. And with that reality, Horace Pike appeared. The bank, a solid brick structure, had stood firm. Pike himself was immaculate. His black suit brushed free of dust, his expression one of deep, civic concern. He stood on the bank steps, addressing the small, shattered crowd of survivors. He announced that in this time of trial, the bank would stand with the community. All property loans, all mortgages, would be granted an immediate extension, a grace period to rebuild. A few men cheered weakly. But the relief came with a condition. They would need to sign new papers, a simple formality, to codify the new terms, buried in those terms. In small print, Pike knew most of them could no longer read without their spectacles. Was an interest rate that doubled their debt, a rate that would seize their land before the first new roof was hammered into place. Elias Crow was also busy. He moved among the ranchers, men like Zeb Hollis, whose fences were gone and cattle scattered. Crow shook his head, his face a mask of sympathy. He told them he had terrible news. The railroad company, seeing the devastation, had decided to reroute. This valley was too dangerous. This land, he said, was now worthless. He offered, as a personal kindness, to buy their deeds for pennies on the dollar, just to help them get a fresh start somewhere else. The lie was smooth, delivered with the confidence of a man who saw disaster as nothing more than opportunity. May paid them no mind. She was in the infirmary, in a small storage room where they had put the stranger. He was breathing steadily. Sister June had confirmed it, 3 broken ribs, a concussion, but he would live. The talk started in the street, in the bread lines, in the wreckage. It was low, at first, then gained confidence. The talk was about May, how she had defied the storm, how she had dragged the Apache in. The words were ugly. They said she was unclean, touched by savagery. They said she was desperate, willing to risk the cellar for a man no decent woman would look at. The old name, Ugly May, was back. But now it was laced with something more toxic, fear, suspicion. She had not just been foolish. She had brought a dark omen into their sanctuary. Her isolation, once a quiet fence, was now a solid wall. Aunt Bridget, her arm in a sling, her face etched with pain and anger, finally confronted her in the ruined kitchen. She demanded to know why. Why him? Why risk everything for that? May was quiet for a long time, scrubbing a pot caked with mud and spoiled stew. She finally stopped, her hands raw in the cold water. She looked at her aunt, and her gaze did not waver. She told her it was not because of the names. She did not care about the names. She was angry. She was angry because when she saw him on the ground and heard the voices from the cellar, she knew what they saw. They did not see a man. They saw a thing, a problem, a piece of trash the storm should have taken. May told her aunt she did not save him because he was good, or because he was Apache, or because he was anything. She saved him because he was a person, and he was hurt, and she was the only one standing in the wind who seemed to see that. This was the iron in her spine. It was not beauty, and it was not courage. Not really. It was a simple, stubborn belief in dignity, a belief that was about to be tested far more than any storm could. The air for 2 days had been thick with the sound of hammering and the smell of raw, splintered pine. Red Hollow was rebuilding itself, nail by nail, board by board. The eatery was a skeleton of its former self, the front wall replaced by a patchwork of salvaged timber and flapping canvas tarps. May O'Rourke felt the grit in her teeth, in her hair, in the folds of her clothes. It was a constant. She arrived before dawn, the sky a pale, bruised gray. She had slept badly, her dreams filled with the roar of the wind and the strange, intense stare of the man she had pulled from the storm. Sister June had said his ribs would mend, that he was strong, but the town's mood remained sour. The whispers about her actions as sharp as the flying debris had been. This morning, something was wrong. The canvas flap that served as their new door was not tied shut. It was held in place by a large Bowie knife, plunged deep into the door jamb. Pinned beneath the crossguard was a piece of rough paper, folded once. May's breath caught. She looked around the empty street, at the ruined facades and the pale columns of chimney smoke. Nothing. She reached out with a hand that trembled, not from cold, but from a deep, sudden dread. She pulled the paper free from under the blade. The knife remained, a violation in the wood. She unfolded the note. The letters were crude, written in charcoal. Return the silver locket or regret it. May's hand flew to her neck, her fingers closing around the familiar, cool shape beneath her dress. The locket? Not her money, not a threat against her aunt. The locket. It was the one thing that was hers, the one piece of her mother she had left. The threat felt personal in a way the town's insults never had. It was not an attack on ugly May, it was an attack on Sila's daughter. In the infirmary, the world was reduced to the sharp scent of carbolic acid and the dull, persistent throb in his side. Chaitan Aichi was awake. He had been awake for hours. His mind clear, his body a catalogue of pain. Every breath was a negotiation with his broken ribs. He had lain still, listening to the sounds of the small clinic, to the quiet, efficient movements of Sister June. He had gathered the facts. He was in Red Hollow. There had been a tornado, and he had been dragged to safety by a woman. He remembered her through a haze of pain, the mud-caked hair, the terror in the air, the absolute steadiness in her eyes. And he remembered the locket, just a flash of it, as she bent over him in the cellar. Sister June entered, carrying a small tray. She was followed by the woman, May. She was carrying a tin cup of broth. She stepped closer to his cot. "Your ribs are healing," Sister June said, her voice calm and firm. "But you must not move quickly. You were very lucky." May held out the cup. He pushed himself up on one elbow, the pain seizing his chest. He took the cup, his fingers brushing hers. His gaze was steady on her face. He saw the scar, the tiredness in her eyes. She leaned forward slightly to adjust his pillow, a simple gesture of care. As she did, the silver locket on its leather cord swung free from the collar of her dress. It hung in the space between them, catching the weak morning light. Chaitan froze. His breath stopped, the cup in his hand tilted. It was not just a locket, it was the locket. He knew the pattern, the 3 interlocking circles, the mark of the mountain cedar. He had seen it only once before, many years ago, in the fire and chaos of a raid near El Paso. A woman, her face smeared with soot, her dress torn, had pushed him, a young boy then, into a shallow arroyo. She had saved him from a volley of stray bullets, and as she pushed him down, he had seen that exact locket gleaming against her skin. Her name had been Sila O'Rourke. Later, he had found her again, wounded, dying. He was just a boy, but he understood the weight of a promise. He had sworn to her, with a child's desperate sincerity, that he would find her child, a daughter she said was safe with her sister. He had promised to watch over her, a promise he had failed to keep, lost in the intervening years of war, scouting, and survival. Until now. He looked from the locket to May's face, the same steady eyes, the same set of the jaw. This was the woman from the storm. This was the child from El Paso. This was Sila's daughter. The promise he had made as a boy now settled on him with the weight of a man's duty. May, unaware of the storm that had just passed through him, tucked the locket back into her dress and nodded politely. She turned and left the room, leaving him with the warm broth and the cold, hard certainty of his past. His first instinct was to leave. He was a danger to her. He was Apache, a man unwelcome, a magnet for the very trouble he was sworn to prevent. His presence in this town would only bring more eyes, more suspicion, more threats like the whispers he had already heard directed at her. To protect her, he had to disappear. He waited until Sister June was occupied. He swung his legs over the side of the cot. His teeth gritted against the tearing pain. He found his clothes, cleaned and folded on a stool. He dressed slowly, his body protesting every move. He slipped out the back door of the infirmary into a narrow alley filled with broken crates and storm debris. He leaned against the brick wall, breathing shallowly, taking stock. The town was wounded. He could use that. He could move through the chaos unseen. He started to make his way toward the edge of town, planning to fetch his hidden cache of supplies and then watch from the mesas. But as he passed the alley that opened onto the main street, he saw the eatery, and he saw the men watching it. There were two of them. They were not ranchers. They were not miners. They wore cheap suits and hard, flat-brimmed hats. They stood across the street, pretending to inspect the damage to the hardware store, but their eyes never left the canvas flap of Bridget's eatery. One of them, a man with a heavy jaw, nudged the other as May stepped out, looked at the knife mark, and hurried back inside. Chayton recognized their kind. They were railroad men, or bank men, hired muscle. They were watching May. He knew, with a sinking certainty, that leaving was no longer an option. Leaving would be an abandonment. The threat was already here. A voice startled him. Going somewhere. Sheriff Calder stood at the mouth of the alley. His face was gray with exhaustion, his badge dull with dust. Chayton said nothing. He merely watched the sheriff. "Look," Calder said, rubbing the back of his neck. "I appreciate what the girl did, and maybe what you did in that cellar, but your presence here is a complication." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Horace Pike has been in my office. He's concerned about vagrancy, about the stability of the town after this storm. He does not like complications." Chayton remained silent, his expression unreadable. Calder sighed. "This is not official. This is a courtesy. I want you out of Red Hollow. I'm giving you 48 hours. After that, I will have to arrest you for trespassing, or vagrancy, or anything else Pike decides to call it, for your own good. And," he added, glancing toward the eatery, "for hers." Chayton nodded once. He understood perfectly. Calder was a man trapped, and Pike was the one setting the trap. He turned and walked deeper into the alley, vanishing into the maze of ruined back lots. He would obey the sheriff. He would be gone, but he would not be leaving. At the eatery, the damage was worse than it looked. The main roof beam over the kitchen had cracked in the storm. It was sagging, groaning under the weight of the waterlogged sod. Aunt Bridget, her arm in a sling, was trying to direct Zeb Hollis on how to fix a tarp over the hole. But Zeb was drunk and useless. "Forget it. Zeb," Bridget snapped, her patience gone. "I will do it myself." "May, inside. Heard her aunt scrambling on the damaged roof. Aunt Bridget, no, wait for the sheriff. It is not stable." "I cannot wait," Bridget yelled back, her voice tight with pain from her arm. "The rain is coming again, and it will ruin what little we have left." She moved along the broken shingles, trying to pull the heavy canvas into place. Chayton saw it from the alley across the street. He saw the woman on the roof, one-armed, struggling. He saw the beam shift, a small cascade of dirt and splinters falling into the kitchen. He saw it before it happened. The beam cracked with the sound of a pistol shot. It gave way, the entire section of roof collapsing inward. Aunt Bridget cried out, slipping on the wet shingles, her good arm snagged in a tangle of rope and canvas, dragging her down toward the collapsing hole. May screamed from below. Chayton moved. He crossed the street in 3 long strides, ignoring the fire in his ribs. He vaulted the broken porch rail, landed inside the ruined kitchen, and looked up. He saw Bridget sliding, her good hand clawing at the roof, the tangle of rope pulling her directly into the path of the falling timber. He grabbed a long, splintered 2x4 from the floor. He shoved it up, bracing it against the main falling beam, deflecting its path just enough. It crashed down beside him, shaking the floor, filling the air with dust. He was already moving, climbing the wreckage, grabbing the wall studs to pull himself up. He reached the edge of the hole just as Bridget slipped again. He grabbed her, his grip iron, and hauled her back from the edge, away from the snagged rope. The canvas tore free and fell into the kitchen below. She was gasping, her face white with terror. He used his knife, the one from his boot, to cut the rope that was still twisted around her splinted arm. She looked at him, her eyes wide with shock. Then her gaze dropped to the knife in his hand. The handle was carved from juniper wood, worn smooth with time. Into the wood was a small, precise carving. It was a single hawk feather laid across a mountain peak. Bridget's breath hitched. She stared at the carving, her mind flashing back through the years, through the dust and the fire. El Paso, she whispered, her voice barely audible. The fire on the slope. She looked up at his face, seeing him for the first time. You are the boy, the Apache boy. Sila saved you. Chayton's face was a mask, but his eyes held hers. He nodded. Once. Bridget's hand went to her mouth. And May, she breathed, the pieces clicking into place with horrifying clarity. May is her child. He met her gaze. He put one finger to his lips, a command for silence. He helped her to her feet, guiding her toward the stable part of the roof. May was calling from below, frantic. He did not wait for May to see him. He did not wait for Bridget to say another word. He was a ghost. He dropped back down into the alley, the pain in his ribs a white-hot fire, and was gone. Bridget was left on the roof, her heart pounding, the weight of a secret settling on her, heavier than any storm beam. From the shadows, Chayton watched. He knew now. The promise was confirmed. The threat was real. He would not leave. He would become the guardian his promise demanded, unseen, unheard, and absolute. Miles away, in the solid, undamaged comfort of the Red Hollow Bank and Trust, Horace Pike poured 2 glasses of whiskey. He handed one to Elias Crow. The man you hired is a clumsy fool, Pike said, his voice smooth. A knife in the door. It is so theatrical. It will make her suspicious. Crow grunted, downing the whiskey. It got the message sent. She knows we want it. We do not just want it, Horace Pike corrected him, staring out the window at his ruined town. We need it. The railroad is not diverting. The railroad is stopping here. But it needs a permanent water station, a tank, and the only reliable, year-round water source within 10 miles is the spring in the Arroyo del Cielo. Crow looked confused. That is just an old prospector's story. It is not, Pike said. Selah O'Rourke's husband found it, and when he died, she kept the map. She was a strange woman, too friendly with the locals, too smart for her own good. She knew what it was worth, and I know she hid that map inside her locket, the locket her daughter now wears. Crow finally understood. The map. The map, Pike affirmed. And rumors say, silver. But I do not care about the silver. I care about the water. The man who controls the water controls the railroad. And the man who controls the railroad controls this entire territory. The storm was a blessing. It has made everyone desperate. Now, I want that locket. That night, May sat on her small cot in the attic room above the ruined kitchen. The wind whistled through the new gaps in the walls. The knife, the note, the fear. And now, her aunt's strange, shaken silence after her fall. Her hand went to the locket. It felt heavy, heavier than it ever had before. A dead weight. Return it. She had worn it every day of her life. She had never opened it. It felt like breaking a promise to a woman she could not remember. But the threat had changed everything. This was no longer just a memory. It was a target. Her fingers, rough from hauling wood and scrubbing pots, traced the tarnished silver edge. She felt for a catch, a hinge, something she had never searched for before. Near the bale, where the leather cord passed through, her fingernail found a tiny, recessed clasp. She pressed it. The locket sprang open in her hand. It was not a portrait. It was not a lock of hair. Inside, protected by the hollow silver shell, was a small, tightly folded piece of dried hide, brittle with age. Her heart was pounding so hard it hurt her chest. She carefully unfolded the parchment. It was a map. The lines were drawn in faded ink. There were markings she did not understand, a mix of old Spanish names for landmarks and, stranger still, symbols that looked like the pictographs she had seen on the rocks far outside of town, Apache symbols. It was a map, and though she could not read it, she knew with chilling certainty that this was what the men were after. This was the secret that had been hanging around her neck, silent, her entire life. She folded it, her hands shaking, and snapped the locket shut. The cool metal against her skin no longer felt like comfort. It felt like danger. The town of Red Hollow was a symphony of reconstruction, and every note was a hammer blow. May O'Rourke, her hands raw and splintered, tried to stretch a piece of scavenged canvas over the hole in the eatery's roof. The wind, her constant nagging enemy, kept ripping it from her grasp. She was balanced precariously on the same beam that had almost taken her aunt, her body aching with a weariness that went bone deep. A shadow fell over her. She did not startle. She had begun to sense his presence. Chayton Naichi stood on the solid part of the roof, his feet silent. He did not speak, but he took the corner of the canvas from her. He pointed to the west, where the sky was clear, then pointed to the way the wind was curling around the chimney. He was teaching her, without words, to read the air. He showed her how to fold the edge of the tarp, how to use the wind's own force to hold it down before she nailed it, making a seal that would hold. They worked in this silent partnership for an hour. His ribs still pained him. She could see the tightness around his mouth every time he stretched. When they were finished, she went down and returned with 2 items, a small clay pot and a piece of charcoal. She handed him the pot. "Sister June's poultice, for the ribs." He nodded his thanks. She then took the charcoal and, on a clean piece of pine board, wrote a word, roof. He watched her, his dark eyes intense. He took the charcoal from her, his hand surprisingly steady, and copied the letters beside hers. His were rough, angular, the strokes of a man used to drawing maps, not letters. She smiled, a small, tired curving of her lips. She pointed to the sky and wrote, wind. He copied it, then he pointed at her. She paused, her breath catching. She wrote her name, May. He looked at it for a long time. Then, with a slow, deliberate hand, he wrote his own name beneath hers, Chayton. A trust was building between them, woven from these shared, quiet actions. It was a trust born not of confessions, but of competence. He knew the wind. She knew the letters. Both were forms of survival. Survival, however, required more than patched roofs. It required supplies. The makeshift market was a collection of stalls and wagons in the muddy street, a place of barter and anxious, loud conversation. May, her basket on her arm, tried to trade a small bag of salvaged beans for flour. Mr. Henderson, the dry goods merchant who had yelled at her from the cellar, saw her. His face, usually pale and doughy, was blotched with anger. "What are you doing here? Girl!" he boomed, his voice drawing the attention of the small crowd. "We do not want your kind bartering here." May flinched, but held her ground. "I'm just trading, Mr. Henderson, like everyone." "Like everyone," he sneered. "You are not like everyone. You are the one who brought that heathen into the cellar. You are the one who put decent folk at risk. You are unclean." The word hung in the air, ugly and venomous. People stepped away from May, her small circle of isolation widening. A voice, dry as alkali dust, cut through the silence. "Well, now, Henderson, that is a fine way to talk to the woman who pulled you out of your own pantry when the wall fell in." Zeb Hollis leaned against a wagon wheel, whittling a piece of wood. He was sober, his eyes sharp and contemptuous. "This is not your affair, cowboy," Henderson snapped. Zeb stood up, slowly. He was not a big man, but he moved with a wiry confidence. He spat a stream of tobacco juice into the mud near Henderson's boots. "You are yelling at a woman who did more to save this town in one afternoon than you have done in your entire penny-pinching life. Now, you will either trade her the flour, or you will deal with me." Henderson's eyes darted around. Looking for support, he found none. Zeb's reputation for a quick, mean temper was well known. Sheriff Calder arrived, his hand on his holster. All right. Break it up. Zeb, go on. Henderson, back to your stall." He placed himself between them, his presence a weary blockade. "May, take your things and go home," Calder said, his voice low. "Just try not to stir things up." "Stir things up." May's voice was a low, shaking whisper. "I did nothing." Calder looked away, unable to meet her eyes. "Just go, May!" She turned and fled, the flower forgotten, the whispers of the crowd following her like a second, dirtier wind. She did not see Elias Crow, standing in the shadow of the bank. He was not watching her. He was watching her Aunt Bridget, who was arguing with a bank clerk. He saw Bridget slam her worn ledger and her copy of the loan agreement onto the counter. And when she turned away in frustration, Crow noted exactly where the clerk filed that thin, precious piece of paper. May sought out the one person in Red Hollow who seemed to make sense of the Earth Old Man Toro. She found him clearing a thicket of storm-tossed mesquite from his irrigation ditch. He worked with a steady, rhythmic swing of his axe, his ancient back bent to the task. She brought him water. He thanked her, wiping his forehead. He pointed with his chin toward the low hills. The storm, it was a bad thing, but it moves the world. It uncovers what was hidden. "What do you mean?" May asked. He led her to the edge of his property, to a dry arroyo that had been little more than a dusty scar for as long as she could remember. Now, at the bottom, a small, dark trickle of water seeped from the cracked earth. It was not much, but it was new. The wind opened the rock. He said, "This is old water. My grandfather called this place the Arroyo del Cielo. He said there was a spring, a fuente de la vida, a life source, but it was lost." He looked at the trickle. Perhaps it is not lost anymore. May's hand went to her throat, to the locket, life source. The words echoed in her mind. She made a decision, her hands trembling. She pulled the locket free and opened it, showing him the small, brittle map. She trusted him in a way she trusted no one else. Toro's eyes widened. He touched the hide map with one calloused finger. He pointed to a symbol drawn near the arroyo's location. It was not Spanish. It was Apache. "This," he said, his voice hushed, "this mark means water that stays. This is a map to a permanent spring in this land. Girl, that is not just valuable. It is life. It is more than gold. It is more than silver." May finally understood. Horace Pike did not want her mother's memory. He wanted water. He wanted the lifeblood of the entire valley. That night, she could not stay in her small, stifling attic room. She needed air. She needed the man who understood the wind. She found Chayton in the ruins of the livery stable, near the wrecked skeleton of the wind tower. He had built a small, smokeless fire, a circle of stones that held a few glowing embers. She sat across from him, sharing the bread and dried beef she had brought. The silence stretched, comfortable, filled only by the whisper of the wind through the broken tower. "They call me Ugly May," she said, her voice so quiet he had to lean forward. She had not planned to say it. The words just came. It started when I was a girl. Because of this, she touched the scar on her cheek. After a while, the name just sticks. It becomes who you are. He watched her, his face impassive in the firelight. He said nothing, but his silence was an invitation. "Sometimes," she continued, her voice gaining a small measure of strength, "I think they are right. I bring trouble, the storm, my aunt's arm, you—" He finally spoke, his voice low and rough. "A name is what someone else gives you. It is not who you are." She looked at him, surprised by the suddenness of his words. He turned his gaze to the fire. "My people were called many names. Savage, Heathen. Dog. They put us on a long walk, away from our lands. My brother, he was younger than me. He was not strong. The soldiers called him lazy. He died on that walk. His name was Taza. It means strong. He poked the fire with a stick, the embers flaring. They called him lazy until he died. But that was not his name. May felt a sharp, sudden kinship with this quiet, wounded man. They were two people, defined by the world's casual cruelty, sitting in the wreckage of a town that saw them both as less than whole. The wind shifted, carrying the first chill of the deep desert night. It cut through May's thin shawl, and she shivered. Chayton moved. He did not ask. He simply shifted his position, his body placing him between her and the wind. His shoulder was close to hers. The warmth from his body was a solid, living thing. She looked at him, and her gaze fell to his side. The poultice she had given him was stained. A dark patch of blood was seeping through his shirt. "You are bleeding. You moved too fast today." Before he could protest, she had her midwifery bag, the one she now carried everywhere. She took out a clean rag and a small bottle of carbolic. "Let me—" He nodded. He turned his side to her. She gently untied the bandage. The wound from the broken rib was angry, torn open by his exertions. She cleaned it, her touch light and practiced, her movements professional. But this was not the infirmary. This was the dark, and they were alone. He watched her face, illuminated by the low fire. He saw the concentration, the gentleness. He saw the scar, pale in the red light. When she finished, her hands lingered on the new bandage. He raised his hand, the one that was not braced against the ground. He touched her cheek. His fingers were rough, calloused, but his touch was light as a feather. He traced the line of her scar, from her cheek to the corner of her mouth. She did not pull away. She did not flinch. She closed her eyes, her breath catching in her throat. He leaned in. The movement was slow, hesitant. He was giving her time to refuse. She did not. He kissed her. It was not a kiss of passion, but of discovery. It was as chaste as it was profound, a simple, warm pressure of his lips against hers. It lasted only a moment, and then he pulled back. The air between them was electric. "We wait," he said, his voice husky. She opened her eyes. She understood. This was not the time. There was too much danger, too much to do. She nodded, a single, sharp dip of her chin. She put her hand over his, where it still rested on her cheek. Their foreheads touched, just for a second. A silent promise, an alliance. The next morning, the alliance was tested. A notice was nailed to the sheriff's office door, the black ink stark and official. Horace Pike, in accordance with the laws of the New Mexico Territory, was announcing a public auction. It was for the properties of those citizens who, having suffered total loss in the storm, were now in default of their loan agreements. The auction would be in 3 days. May read the list of names. There were 5. The last one was Bridget O'Rourke, Eatery. She ran, the notice rattling in her hand. She found her aunt staring at the bank, her face a mask of pale, cold fury. "He put us on the list. May, Bridget's voice was dead. He said I missed a payment. He said I was in default before the storm. But that is not true. We paid. He says he has no record of it. He says my receipt is missing." May felt the trap spring shut. This was Pike. This was Crow. They were not just trying to scare her. They were trying to erase her. She looked for Chayton. He was across the street, watching, his face grim. She started toward him, a new, cold fear creeping into her heart. It was the old whisper, the town's curse. "I bring trouble." She had opened the locket. She had gone to Toro, and now her aunt was losing her home. She stopped, her steps faltering. Maybe they were right. Maybe everyone she got close to was poisoned by her very presence. She turned away from Chayton, her shoulders slumped, and went into the dark, ruined eatery. Chayton saw her withdrawal. He saw the old fear return to her eyes. He felt his own ghosts rise up. He had made a promise to a dying woman. He had failed to keep it for a decade. He had lost his brother. He had failed to save a friend at the San Carlos reservation. Every promise he made seemed to end in dust. He wanted to go to her, to tell her she was wrong. But the fear of failing again, of failing her, held him in place. He remained a guardian in the shadows, paralyzed by his own past. The confrontation came that afternoon. May had to get more herbs for Sister June, a task that took her to the edge of the prairie, where the wild sage grew. She was alone. 2 men stepped out from behind a stand of fire-blackened cottonwoods. It was the 2 men from the bank, the ones with the hard hats. "Mister, Pike would like that locket." "Missy," the big one said. He was not asking. May clutched the locket through her dress. "No." "Then we will take it." He grabbed her arm. She fought, twisting, kicking, but he was too strong. He was reaching for her neck. He came from nowhere, a silent blur of motion. Chayton. He was not a ghost this time. He was a storm. He used a heavy piece of cottonwood branch like a club, striking the man's wrist, breaking his hold on May. The man roared in pain. The second man drew a knife. Chayton moved inside the lunge, striking him in the ribs, exactly where he himself was injured, using the man's momentum to send him sprawling. It was fast, brutal, and efficient. The 2 men scrambled to their feet and ran, disappearing back toward the town. Chayton was breathing heavily, his hand pressed to his own side. He looked not at May, but at the ground. He pointed to a deep, clear footprint in the mud. "Railroad boots," he said, his voice flat. "Standard issue." He knew who they were. He knew who sent them. They walked back to town, the space between them filled with a new, shared danger. Chayton went straight to Sheriff Calder's office. May watched from the street as Chayton pointed to his side, then pointed toward the prairie. Calder listened, his face grim. He went with Chayton, and May followed. They looked at the boot prints. Calder sighed, pushing his hat back. "It is a boot print. Son, I cannot arrest Horace Pike over a boot print. I know it was his men. You know it was his men. But knowing is not proving." He looked at Chayton, then at May, his eyes full of a weary frustration. "I am sorry. My hands are tied. I need irrefutable proof." May looked at Chayton. The sheriff was trapped by the law. They were trapped by Pike, and the auction was in 3 days. They were on their own. The auction was 2 days away. The air in Red Hollow was no longer just thick with dust. It was thick with desperation. Horace Pike's notice was a death sentence tacked to a post. May O'Rourke knew she held the only defense, the small, brittle map inside her locket. But a map was not proof. It was a story. She needed Old Man Toro's water that stays. She needed to see it, touch it, and prove to the town that Pike was not seizing land. He was stealing their future. She had to go to the Arroyo del Cielo. She did not have to ask Chayton. He knew. He found her by the wreckage of the livery. His face set. He told her the Arroyo was a half-day's ride. Through broken land. The storm would have changed every trail. He said he could guide her. They needed allies. They needed a witness. And they needed a gun. They found Zeb Hollis by the watering trough, his hands shaking slightly, his eyes clear and angry. May told him the story. She spoke of the map, the water, and the auction. She spoke of Pike. Zeb spat into the dust. Pike. He said the name like a curse. That man would foreclose on his own mother. He looked at May, then at Chayton, a woman with a secret map, an Apache guide, and a drunk cowboy. He grinned, a sharp, humorless expression. It had the makings of a fine disaster. He said, "I am in..." Their final stop was the infirmary. Sister June was cleaning her instruments. She listened, her hands never ceasing their methodical work. When May finished, Sister June looked up, her gaze clear and analytical. "You will need medical supplies," she said simply. "Zeb is reckless, and you are not fighters. She began packing a canvas satchel, and you will need a credible witness. Someone Pike cannot paint as a fool or a savage. I will come. The small group of 4 left before the first hint of dawn. Slipping out of Red Hollow under the cover of a thick ground fog, they looked like scavengers. 2 men and 2 women on tough, mismatched horses, heading not for the main trail but for the high, rocky ridges. Chayton rode point. He moved not like a man following a path, but like a man reading a language. He read the bent grass, the overturned rocks, the subtle shifts in the wind. May rode beside him, the locket heavy under her shirt. Zeb and Sister June followed, their presence a silent, steady support. They were not alone. Elias Crow was not a fool. He had lost his men on the prairie, but he had not lost his suspicion. He had men watching the town, watching May, watching the strange Apache. When the group of 4 left, Crow's best tracker, a man named Scully, followed at a distance, a shadow among shadows. He sent a rider back to Crow with the news. They were heading for the arroyo. The journey was brutal. The tornado had ripped the land open. Trails were gone, replaced by deep gullies and fields of splintered trees. They had to dismount, leading their horses through treacherous shale. At one point, they reached a new, fast-running creek, born from the storm's displaced water. It was wide and churning with mud. Chayton found a place to cross, a submerged gravel bar, but the current was strong. May's horse stumbled, panicked. It reared, and May slipped from the saddle, falling into the rushing, icy water. The current seized her, pulling her down. She fought, her heavy skirts dragging her under. She saw Zeb shout, but he was too far away. A rope suddenly snaked across the water, landing across her chest. Chayton. He stood on the opposite bank, his feet braced, the rope looped around his waist. He had not hesitated. "Grab it!" he yelled, his voice raw against the roar of the water. She seized the rope. The current pulled, but he was an anchor. He hauled her in, hand over hand, his ribs screaming in protest. He dragged her onto the muddy bank, where she lay coughing, her body shaking with cold and shock. He knelt beside her, his face intense. He checked the rope, still binding her. He told her, his voice low and fierce, not to tie herself to the name that others called her. May looked at him, confused. He touched the rope, then looked at her face. He said she was not ugly May. She was not a fool. She was the one who had seen him in the storm. She was the one who had read the map. She was May. He told her to be that person, not the one Henderson named. He unwound the rope from her waist. The lifeline was gone, but a new bond, stronger than hemp, had been forged. They reached the high canyons by noon. The landscape was desolate, sheer walls of red rock rising to the sky. Old Man Toro's landmark, the twin spires of rock, stood before them. Chayton led them into a narrow cleft, the Arroyo del Cielo. The storm had been here. The canyon floor was scoured clean, boulders tossed about like pebbles, and in the center, where there had been only dry sand, was a miracle. It was a pool of clear, deep water bubbling up from the sandstone. It was not a trickle, it was a spring, wide as a wagon, pulsing with a life that was ancient and new. The tornado had ripped away the tons of rock and debris that had covered it for generations. Sister June knelt, dipped her hand in, and tasted it. Sweet, she breathed. It is pure. May walked toward the head of the spring. There, on the rock wall just above the pool, was a set of carvings, protected by an overhang. She saw the Spanish cross, the date, 1792, and beside it, a set of Apache symbols. She pulled out her locket. She opened it. She held the small hide map against the stone. The lines matched, the symbols matched. There, carved into the rock, was the Apache symbol for water that stays. And beside it, something else, a small, stylized circle with 3 lines, the mark of the mountain cedar, the exact same design that was etched on the cover of her locket. Chayton touched the carving. his voice filled with a sudden, rough emotion. The mark of Sale O'Rourke. This was her mother's place. Her mother had known. She had left this map not for wealth, but for her daughter, an inheritance of life. Zeb, who had been scouting the canyon rim, suddenly whistled, a low, sharp sound. Trouble. May looked up. On the ridge above them, 2 men were setting up a tripod, a surveyor's transit. They were not alone. Chayton motioned them back, into the rocks. He recognized the equipment. Railroad. They moved quickly, using the boulders for cover, until they were just below the ridge. They could hear the men talking. "Crow is crazy," one man said. "He wants this mapped by sundown. Said Pike is moving up the auction." The other man grunted. "Just mark the spot for the tank. It is a perfect gravity feed. This spring will water 100 locomotives a day." He unrolled a large sheet of vellum. It was a technical drawing, a schematic. May could see the lines for the spring, the arroyo, and the precise, neat box labeled Red Hollow Water Station. At the bottom, pressed into the paper, was the official embossed seal of the Union Pacific Railroad. This was it. This was the irrefutable proof Sheriff Calder needed. Chayton knew they had to have it. He signaled to Zeb. He pointed to a pile of loose rocks to the left. A distraction. Zeb nodded. He slipped away. Chayton began a silent, slow climb up the rock face, moving toward the surveyors from behind. Zeb loosed the rocks. The clatter was loud in the quiet canyon. The 2 surveyors spun, drawing their sidearms. What was that? While they were distracted, Chayton moved. He was on the ledge in a flash. He struck the first man, a single, hard blow that sent him down. The second man turned, firing his pistol. The shot went wild. Chayton disarmed him in a blur, the pistol clattering onto the rocks. It was over in seconds. Chayton grabbed the vellum map, tucking it into his shirt. "Get back to the horses," he yelled to May and Sister June. But it was too late. The shot had been a signal. Elias Crow stepped out from the mouth of the canyon, flanked by 4 of his men, including the 2 from the prairie. They had their rifles leveled. "Well, well," Crow said, his voice echoing in the arroyo. "Look what we found. The spring, the map, and all the little rats. All in one place." "Zeb," May whispered, her eyes wide with terror. Zeb was caught in the open, halfway between the surveyors and the group. He had his pistol out, but he was outnumbered. "Drop the gun, cowboy," Crow ordered. Zeb hesitated. He was not a coward. He raised his pistol. A shot cracked. Not from Crow. From Scully, the tracker, hidden on the rim above. Zeb cried out, a sharp gasp, and clutched his side. He staggered, falling to one knee, his gun dropping into the dust. Sister June ran to him. She did not ask permission. She was a woman of mercy, and she went to where she was needed, the rifles all trained on her. "Stop!" Crow commanded. He smiled, enjoying his control. May, her heart hammering against her ribs, looked at Chayton. He was trapped on the ledge above. The surveyor's pistols now in his belt, the map in his shirt. He was a fighter, but he could not fight 6 rifles. Her mind raced. She was not a fighter. She was not a strategist, but she knew the land her mother had mapped. She saw the narrow cleft in the rock behind them. The one Chayton had used, it was wide enough for one person. She saw the horses tethered just beyond it. She grabbed Sister June's satchel. She looked at Chayton and pointed. A sharp, quick gesture. The cleft. Then she looked at Crow. "You want the locket!" she yelled, her voice shaking but carrying. Crow's eyes fixed on her. "That is right, and the map you took." Chayton, from above, understood her plan. He fired one of the surveyor's pistols, not at Crow, but at the rock face just above his head. Chips of stone exploded outward. Crow's men ducked, firing back at the ledge. "Now!" May screamed. She grabbed Sister June. who was supporting the bleeding Zeb. They scrambled for the narrow passage, half dragging, half carrying the cowboy. Chayton gave them covering fire, his shots precise, keeping the men pinned. He was a phantom on the ledge, firing, moving, firing again. May, Sister June, and Zeb tumbled into the narrow cleft. It was barely wide enough to walk through. The walls rose high, offering perfect cover. Crow roared in anger. "Get them!" The men charged, but Chayton was already gone, having leaped from the ledge to a lower rock fall, landing near the horses. He cut them free as May and the others emerged from the pass. "Get on!" he yelled, shoving May toward her horse. They mounted, Zeb groaning, his face pale, Sister June holding him in the saddle. They galloped down the arroyo, the sound of bullets whining off the rocks behind them. They did not stop until they were miles away, hidden in a deep thicket of juniper. Sister June immediately went to work on Zeb. The bullet had passed through, a clean wound, but he had lost blood. She packed it, her hands firm and steady. He would live. May was shaking, the adrenaline leaving her weak. She looked at Chayton. He had the vellum map, safe. She had her locket. They had the proof. They were safe, for a moment. They huddled in the narrow space, hidden from the world. May found herself pressed against Chayton, their backs to the same rock. She could feel the rise and fall of his chest, feel his breath, warm against her ear. The shared danger, the escape, had stripped away all pretense. He spoke, his voice a low rumble, not meant for anyone else. "After this is done, we will talk." She leaned her head back against the stone. Closing her eyes, she knew what he meant. He meant the promise. He meant her mother. He meant the kiss by the fire. She just nodded, her breath catching. The ride back to Red Hollow was silent and grim. They arrived after dark, smuggling Zeb into the infirmary. A new panic gripped the town. Horace Pike had not been idle. While they were gone, news had reached him. His men had failed. May had the proof. He acted decisively. 2 of his men, deputized by a reluctant Sheriff Calder for public safety, had approached Aunt Bridget. They informed her that, due to her default and the instability of her building, she was a danger to the community. She was to be held, for her own protection, in a room at the hotel Pike owned. She was a hostage. And a new notice was posted. The auction had been moved. It was no longer in 2 days. It was tomorrow, at noon. May stood in the infirmary, the railroad map in her hand, her blood cold. Pike had taken her aunt. He had cut their time to nothing. Chayton, Sister June, and May looked at each other. Zeb was pale on the cot, but his eyes were clear. "We cannot go to Calder," Sister June said, her voice flat. "He is compromised. His hands are tied by the law, and now Pike holds the rope." "The bank is a fortress," Zeb rasped from the cot. "Pike will just burn the evidence and laugh." "Then what do we do?" May asked, her voice hollow. "We do not go to the law. We go to the people," Chayton said. He looked at May, his gaze unwavering. Sister June nodded, a slow, grim understanding dawning. "The church. Tomorrow is Sunday. The entire town will be there for morning service." May looked at the railroad map, then at her locket. They would not use the sheriff's office. They would not use the bank. They would use the one place Pike did not own. They would stand up in the church, in front of everyone, and they would tell the truth. It was a desperate, final gamble. The small mission church was the only building in Red Hollow, other than the bank. That felt permanent. It smelled of old pine, wax, and the faint, sweet scent of alkali dust. On this Sunday morning, it was full. The pews were packed with the survivors of the storm, their faces grim and weary. They had come for solace, but mostly they had come for news. The auction was at noon. Despair was a shared hymn. Horace Pike sat in the front pew, his black suit immaculate, his expression one of sober civic duty. Elias Crow sat beside him, a bulky, impatient presence. They looked like the very pillars of the community, mourning with their flock. In the back, by the door, Sheriff Calder stood, his arms crossed, his face a mask of trapped duty. Preacher Davis, a thin man with a reedy voice, was speaking of Job, of faith tested by righteous winds. He spoke of rebuilding, of community, of trusting in the foundations. Horace Pike nodded, his gaze pious. The heavy oak doors at the back of the church groaned open. Every head turned. The sermon died on the preacher's lips. May O'Rourke stood in the doorway, her patched dress dark with mud, her hair pulled back in a severe bun. She was flanked by Sister June, whose face was rigid with purpose, and just behind them, a shadow filling the frame, stood Chayton Naichi. A collective gasp sucked the air from the room. Whispers ignited, spreading like wildfire. The Apache, in the church, ugly May, shameless. May did not hesitate. She walked down the central aisle. Her boots made a damp, deliberate sound on the wooden floor. She was holding a rolled piece of vellum in one hand. Her hand was shaking, but her steps were not. Preacher Davis raised a hand. "Daughter, this is the house of the Lord. This is a time for—" "I am sorry, preacher," May said. Her voice cracked. Just once, then solidified into something hard and clear. "But this is about the house of the Lord. It is about a thief in our midst." The congregation erupted. Horace Pike stood, his face a perfect mask of offended dignity. "Sheriff," he boomed, "this woman is hysterical. She is unwell. She is disrupting this holy service." May did not look at the sheriff. She looked at the people, at Mr. Henderson, at the women who had whispered. She unrolled the vellum map and laid it across the communion rail, the paper crackling in the silence. "Mr. Pike is a thief," she said, her voice carrying to the back pew. Pike laughed, a short, sharp sound of disbelief. "This is madness." "He has been lying to you," May continued, her voice gaining strength. "He told you the railroad was leaving. He told you this valley was too dangerous. He told you your land was worthless, so you would sign his new papers." She pointed to the vellum. "This is a railroad survey map. From yesterday. We took it from Mr. Crow's men. It shows their plan. The railroad is not leaving, it is stopping. Right here." A new murmur swept the room. "And it shows why," May said, pressing her finger to the map. "It shows the plan to build a permanent water station. A tank. It is to be built at the Arroyo del Cielo." She pulled the locket from her neck. "And this is my mother's map. It shows the spring, the water that stays. A spring Mr. Pike knew about. He is seizing our land, my aunt's eatery, the farms, not because they are worthless, but because they hold the only permanent water in this valley. He is not seizing debt. He is stealing your future." The chaos was immediate. Men stood, shouting at Pike, at May. Henderson yelled that she was crazy, that she was lying. From the back, Old Man Toro's voice cut through. "The water," he shouted. "The spring is open. I have seen it." Elias Crow surged forward. "That is a forgery. That Apache probably drew it in the dirt." Pike's two hired men, the ones from the prairie, began to move through the pews, their hands on their belts. They spread the poison. "She is in league with him. They are trying to steal the land for themselves." Sheriff Calder had no choice. He strode down the aisle, his face like thunder. He pushed past May and stared at the map. His eyes scanned the technical lines, the labels, and he saw it. In the bottom corner, the embossed official seal of the railroad. He knew it was real. He turned to Pike. "Mr. Pike." His voice was dangerously quiet, but it cut through the noise. "In light of this evidence, the auction scheduled for noon today is postponed indefinitely." "You cannot do that," Pike snapped, his mask of piety gone. "It is a legal proceeding." "I can, and I am," Calder said, his voice rising. "Pending a full investigation, There is a 48-hour hold on all bank actions. As the crowd reacted, Chaitan Naichi moved. He had been standing in the doorway, a silent sentinel. Now, he walked down the aisle. The people shrank from him, pressing themselves into the pews to avoid his touch. He was Apache. He was in their church. It felt like a sacrilege. He stopped beside May, at the altar. He did not look at the map. He looked at Horace Pike. "You say I drew the map," Chaitan said. His voice was not loud, but it was deep, and it filled the small church. "You say I am a stranger." He turned, scanning the faces of the congregation. "I am not a stranger, not to this valley, and not to her family." He looked at May. He pointed to the locket, which she still held in her hand. "I know this mark," he said, his voice softening just a fraction. "The mountain cedar. I saw it many years ago, near El Paso. I was a boy. I was running. My family was scattered. There was fire and smoke, and the sound of soldiers' guns." A few of the older men in the pews looked down. They remembered the border wars. They remembered the stories. "An Irish woman found me," Chaitan continued. "She pulled me from the path of stray bullets. She hid me in an arroyo. She saved my life. As she pushed me down, I saw that locket." May's head snapped up. Her eyes locked on his. She was barely breathing. "Her name was Selah O'Rourke," Chaitan said, the name a stone dropped in the silence. "She was wounded. She could not follow. She made me promise. She said she had a child, a daughter, safe, with her sister, here in Red Hollow. She made me promise that if I ever found her, I would watch over her, that I would be her guardian." He looked directly at May, his gaze holding her, shielding her. "I am Chaitan Naichi. I am here to honor that promise. I am here to protect my mother's daughter." The revelation was stunning. May's mother, him. A promise. May felt her knees weaken, but she held herself upright, staring at the man who had been a stranger, and was now the only link to a past she had never known. Horace Pike was the first to recover. He laughed. It was a short, ugly, barking sound. "A guardian," he scoffed, his voice dripping with theatrical sarcasm. "How very noble. A beautiful story. An Apache scout, wandering the desert. Just happens to find the long-lost daughter of the woman who saved him, and he finds her right at the moment she happens to need a guardian to help her lay claim to a valuable spring." Pike turned to the pews, his hands spread wide, his face a mask of reasonable concern. "Friends, neighbors, do you not see the trick this man is using this girl? He is using her mother's memory to lay claim to the Arroyo del Cielo. He means to take the water for his people. He means to rob us." The poison worked. The word Apache was a weapon, and Pike wielded it with skill. The faces turned from confused to suspicious. Pike twisted the knife. He looked at May, his eyes cold and assessing. "And as for you, Miss O'Rourke, we have all seen it. We have seen how you follow him, how you meet him in the dark, how you brought him into the cellar, risking us all." He lowered his voice, making it slimy, conspiratorial. "It is a sad thing. A sad thing when a lonely woman is so easily swayed by a strange man. She is compromised. She is not thinking clearly." He was painting her as a harlot, a fool, a traitor to her own kind, blinded by desire for a savage. It was a vicious, calculated strike. The women in the congregation, the ones May had helped, looked down at their hands. The men shifted, their expressions hardening. The social wall around her was now complete. "That is a lie." Sister June's voice was cold as a honed steel blade. She stepped forward from the shadows near the vestry. She was not holding a Bible. She was holding the surveyor's transit. "Mister, Pike calls this map a forgery," she said, her voice clear and cutting. "But this is the instrument used to make it. We took it from Mr. Crow's men at the Arroyo, where they were busy mapping the land that Mr. Pike claims is worthless." Elias Crow lunged for it. "That is railroad property." "Indeed," Sister June said, not flinching. "And this is the railroad's official seal. pressed into the paper. She held the vellum map up for all to see. "That proves nothing," Pike countered, his voice rising. "A stolen map, a stolen instrument, slander from a compromised girl and a bitter nun." "Then perhaps they can tell us." The voice was weak, rasping, from the back door. Zeb Hollis stumbled into the church. He was leaning heavily on Old Man Toro. His shirt was dark with blood beneath the bandage, his face the color of ash, but his eyes were blazing. "I was there," Zeb rasped, wincing as he moved. "I saw them, and so did they." He pointed to the back pew, near the door. 2 men were trying to slip out, their faces pale. The 2 surveyors. "Those 2 men!" Zeb called out, his voice gaining strength. "They were the ones drawing the map. They were the ones who told us Mr. Crow was in a hurry. That Pike was moving up the auction. Tell the town what you told us." The surveyors froze, caught in the spotlight of every eye in the church. They looked at Pike, who was staring at them with murderous intent. They looked at Crow, who was frozen in fury. They looked at the angry, confused faces of the town. One of them stammered, his hat twisting in his hands. "We were just doing our job. Mr. Crow hired us. He said it was official railroad business, to map the new water station." The admission sucked the last of the air from the room. It was true. May had been standing silent, a statue in the storm of accusations. She had heard the truth of her mother. She had heard the poison of Pike's words. She had felt the town turn against her, and then pause, caught in the balance. Now, she stepped forward. She walked past Chayton, past Sister June. She stood alone before the communion rail, facing the town. "I know what you call me," she said. Her voice was not loud. It was low, and it was rough, and it carried to every corner. "I have heard the whispers my whole life. Ugly May." The church was so quiet, she could hear the wind whistling through the storm-cracked window pane. "Mr. Pike says I am lonely. He says I am compromised. Mr. Henderson says I'm unclean." She looked at them, one by one. "You look at me, and you see a scar. You see what you want to see." She took a deep breath, and her shoulders, which had been slumped, straightened. "I am not beautiful by your standards. That is a fact." She looked directly at Pike. "But I am not compromised." She turned her gaze to Henderson. "And I am not unclean." "I am," she said, her voice finally, completely firm. "Useful." The simple word hung in the air. "I am the one who helped Sister June deliver your babies. I am the one who brought soup when you were sick. I am the one who pulled this man," she gestured to Chayton, "from the storm, because he was a man, and he was hurt, and I was the only one who saw it. And I am the one who found the proof that Mr. Pike is trying to steal the water that belongs to all of us." She held up the vellum map. "I do not care what you call me, but I will not let you steal my aunt's home, and I will not let you steal this valley's future." She had not asked for their pity. She had reminded them of her worth. She had reminded them of their worth. In the middle pews, a few men who had signed Pike's new papers, began to stand. The tide had turned. Sheriff Calder had heard enough. The map, the seal, the surveyor's admission, May's declaration. It was enough. "Mr. Pike," Calder said, his voice flat and official. His hand was on his gun. "I am placing the bank's records under protective custody. All of them. The loan agreements. The ledgers. Everything." "This is an outrage," Pike sputtered, his face purpling. "This is illegal." "It is procedure," Calder said, his eyes cold. "I am impounding them. And you," he pointed at Crow, "are coming with me. For questioning. Assault on Mr. Hollis." Pike's 2 hired men, the ones in the pews, started to move, their hands dropping to their holsters. Chayton moved. He did not draw a weapon. He simply stepped off the platform, placing himself between the gunman and the sheriff. He stood there, a guardian. His message was clear. They would not pass. The men stopped. They were hired muscle, not killers. Not in a church, not against him. Pike saw the game was lost. For now, he raised his hands, a gesture of calm surrender. His mask of the concerned citizen slipped back into place. "Of course, Sheriff," he said, his voice suddenly smooth as honey. "I will cooperate fully. I have nothing to hide. My records are an open book. I was only ever acting in the town's best interest." He looked past the sheriff. He looked at May. A cold, thin, serpentine smile touched his lips. "I'm glad this is all being cleared up," he said, his voice soft. "For her ears alone. I would hate for there to be any misunderstanding, especially with the auction. After all, your aunt is so frail. She is a guest at my hotel. You know, we must be so careful. With the town in this state, so fragile." The threat was unspoken. It was brilliant. It was vile. He had lost the public battle. He had lost the bank records. But he had just shown May his last card. He had just reminded her, and her alone, that he still held the Queen. He still had Aunt Bridget. Sheriff Calder, focused on cuffing a sputtering Elias Crow, did not catch the meaning. He took Crow by the arm and started marching him up the aisle. Pike straightened his tie. He nodded to the preacher, a final gesture of his false piety. He turned and walked out of the church, a free man, a man seemingly cooperating with the law. May was left standing at the altar, the vellum map clutched in her hand. She had won the town, but she had just lost her aunt. The church emptied slowly, the congregation spilling into the harsh sunlight. Dazed and divided, they gathered in small, angry knots, arguing over what they had seen. Sheriff Calder, his face a granite mask, had kept his word. He and his 2 deputies were at the bank, their rifles visible, beginning the slow, legal process of seizing Horace Pike's ledgers. Pike, smiling and cooperative, had handed over his keys, offering them coffee while they worked. May, Chayton, and Sister June had returned to the infirmary. Zeb was awake, his face pale but his eyes burning with a cold fire. The victory felt hollow. Pike was free, and Aunt Bridget was his prisoner, a guest in the hotel, guarded by 2 of Pike's men who were, technically, just protecting Pike's property. Pike's threat hung over May, a cold, suffocating weight. He still had her aunt. He had lost the town's opinion, but he still held the single card that mattered. As the sun began to set, the town was exhausted, the tension a palpable, vibrating thing. May and Chayton were in the ruined eatery, trying to board up the exposed kitchen, when the sound came. It was not the wind. It was the sharp, panicked ringing of the mission bell. It rang again and again. Fast, too fast. A man's voice roared from the street. A single word that Red Hollow feared more than anything. Fire. May ran to the street. At the east end of town, an orange glow was clawing at the sky. It was Old Man Toro's property, his newly rebuilt granary. The one holding what little seed he had saved was a column of roaring flame. The town, already on edge, exploded into action. Men ran from the saloon, from their homes, grabbing buckets. Sheriff Calder and his deputies emerged from the bank, their faces grim. The ledgers would have to wait. They were the law, and the town was burning. They ran toward the fire, organizing the bucket brigade. It was chaos. May grabbed a bucket, ready to join, ready to help. Chayton's hand closed on her arm. His grip was iron. He was not looking at the fire. He was looking across the street, at the hotel. He spoke, his voice low and urgent. "It is a diversion." May's blood went cold. She looked. The 2 men who had been guarding the hotel lobby were gone, drawn to the fire like everyone else. But as she watched, the hotel's side door opened. 2 new men emerged. It was Scully, Crow's tracker, and the other hard-faced man from the prairie. They were not running toward the fire. They were dragging a 3rd person between them, a woman who stumbled, her arm in a sling. Aunt Bridget. They hauled her onto a wagon, the one Pike kept for land surveys. Scully whipped the horses. The wagon lurched into the alley, disappearing into the growing shadows. "They have her," May whispered, her voice hollow with terror. Chayton was already moving. He pulled May toward the livery. "The horses, now!" They mounted, their movements swift and silent. They galloped out of the livery, cutting across the back lots, avoiding the pandemonium on the main street. The town was a mass of shouting men and running figures, all silhouetted against the roaring fire. No one saw them leave. They found the wagon tracks easily in the dusty trail leading east, toward the railroad line. They rode hard, the orange glow of the fire fading behind them, the vast, empty dark of the prairie opening up. May rode with a cold knot of dread in her stomach. Pike was not just a thief, he was ruthless. He had burned Toro's grain as a simple distraction, sacrificing a man's livelihood to move a single piece on the board. The wind was picking up, but this was not the clean, high-country wind they knew. It was a different wind, hot and heavy, blowing from the south. It smelled of dust, a deep, choking, ancient dust. Chayton, riding just ahead, pulled his horse to a sudden stop. May almost collided with him. He was staring at the southern horizon. It was gone. The stars were gone. The horizon itself was a roiling, churning wall of black and brown, 1,000 feet high. It was moving toward them, and it was moving fast. "A haboob," Chayton said, his voice flat. "A dust storm." Before May could even process the word, it hit them. It was not a storm, it was an impact. The world vanished. The air was gone, replaced by a solid, screaming mass of sand and grit. It was instantly, terrifyingly dark. The wind shrieked, a physical force that tried to rip her from the saddle. Her horse screamed, turning in a blind panic. She felt Chayton's hand seize her reins, forcing her horse steady. He was beside her, a phantom in the brown dark. He yelled something, but the wind tore the words from his mouth. He pulled her horse close until their knees were touching. He put his mouth to her ear. "Hold on to my belt. Do not let go." She did as he said, her gloved hand gripping the thick leather. He led them forward, step by step, into the blinding, suffocating chaos. The wagon tracks were long gone, but he was not tracking. He was navigating by the feel of the land, by the very direction of the wind. He leaned in again, shouting over the roar. He taught her a sound, a low, two-note whistle, the call of a canyon wren. "If we are separated, listen, whistle back. Do not stop." She nodded, though he could not see her. They were a single, small island in a howling universe of grit. The dust was so thick she could barely breathe, her scarf already a solid mass of mud. Time ceased to exist. They walked for what felt like hours, their horses trembling, their heads low. Then Chayton stopped. He sniffed the air. May could smell it too, beneath the heavy odor of the dust. Coal smoke, grease, and the sharp tang of nervous livestock. The railroad camp? They dismounted, leaving the horses tied together. They were a greater liability now. They moved forward on foot, May still clutching Chayton's belt. The storm was their cover, a deafening, blinding shield. They found the wagon, its canvas cover snapping like a volley of gunfire in the wind. It was empty. Chayton pointed, a faint, blurry yellow light ahead. It was a large tent, the foreman's tent, its lanterns glowing weakly through the canvas and the dust. They could hear faint voices, yelling to be heard over the storm. 2 men stood outside the tent opening, their backs to the wind, scarves wrapped around their faces. They were miserable, blinded, and deafened. Chayton let go of May's hand. He put a finger to his lips, a gesture she felt more than saw. He told her to wait. He unwound the riata from his saddle. He did not seem to walk. He seemed to dissolve into the swirling dust. May held her breath, her heart hammering. One moment, the guard on the right was there. The next, a loop of rope dropped over his head, silent as a snake. He was jerked backward, vanishing into the brown dark without a sound. The second guard turned. sensing a change, a shift in the space beside him. He pulled his pistol, but Chayton was already there. He was not a ghost this time. He was a solid, brutal force, a single, hard strike. The man crumpled, and Chayton caught him before he hit the ground, lowering him silently. "It was done," he whistled, the low, two-note call. May ran to him. He nodded toward the tent. He drew his knife. May pulled the pistol Sister June had pressed into her hand, the heavy Colt that had belonged to Zeb. They burst through the tent flap together. The scene inside was lit by a single, swinging oil lamp. Scully, the tracker, was there, along with one other man, and Aunt Bridget. She was tied to a chair, her face pale with terror. Scully spun, his own pistol drawn. He grabbed Bridget, pulling her up out of the chair. Using her as a shield, he put the gun to her head. "Stop!" he roared. "Stop right there, or she is dead." May froze. Chayton froze. They were 5 feet away. Scully laughed, his voice a ragged bark. "I knew you would come. The boss said you would. Drop the guns. Now." Chayton looked at May. He did not lower his knife. May's hand was shaking so hard she could barely hold the heavy pistol. She looked at Scully, at his desperate, wild eyes. He was not Pike. He was not a planner. He was a cornered animal, and he was ready to bite. "Let her go," May said, her voice a thin, reedy thing. "You are in no position to bargain. Missy, drop it." Aunt Bridget closed her eyes, a tear cutting a clean path through the dust on her cheek. May lifted the pistol. Her hand suddenly became rock steady. The shaking stopped. A cold, clear calm settled over her. She knew she could not hit Scully without hitting her aunt. So she aimed higher. She pulled the trigger. The explosion was deafening in the small space. Scully flinched. The bullet did not hit him. It hit the brass chain holding the oil lamp. The lamp crashed to the floor. The tent was plunged into absolute, suffocating darkness. Bridget screamed. Scully roared in surprise. Chayton moved. In the blackness, May could hear the struggle. A grunt, the sound of a body hitting the table. A gasp. "May, get your aunt," Chayton's voice, calm, in the dark. May scrambled forward, found her aunt, and dragged her toward the tent flap. The second man was trying to find a match, fumbling in the dark. A moment later, Chayton was there. He had Scully's pistol. He shoved both men toward the center of the tent. He used the rope from Bridget's chair to tie them, his movements fast and practiced. It was over. Bridget was shaking, sobbing into May's shoulder. They were safe. As if summoned by the silence, the wind began to die. The howling shriek lessened to a deep, wounded moan. The air was still thick, but the world was returning. They heard horses outside and a man yelling their names. "Sheriff Calder!" He burst into the tent, his own lantern held high, his pistol drawn. He took in the scene. The two tied men, Bridget, safe, May and Chayton, covered in a thick layer of mud and dust. He lowered his gun, his face etched with a weary relief. He looked at Scully. "Arson, kidnapping, assault. I think that is enough to hold you for the circuit judge." Just then, one of his deputies ran up, his horse breathing hard. "Sheriff, the bank!" "What about it?" Calder snapped, his attention on his prisoners. "Smoke, sir. It is not on fire, but there is smoke coming from the chimney." Calder went pale. He looked at May, and she saw the dawning, terrible realization in his eyes. The fire, the kidnapping. It was all a distraction. He ran from the tent, shouting for his horse. He galloped back toward Red Hollow, back toward the bank. But May and Chayton knew. They knew what he would find. An empty office, a warm stove, and a pile of fine, white ash. Horace Pike was burning the ledgers. He was destroying the proof. The ride back was impossible in the lingering storm. They found a small, abandoned line shack near the railroad tracks, a single room of wood meant to shelter surveyors. It was small, but it was sturdy. They got Aunt Bridget inside, wrapped her in every blanket they had. She was asleep in moments, exhausted by the terror. May and Chayton sat in the doorway, watching the brown, dusty air swirl outside. The world was quiet, muffled. The adrenaline was gone, leaving them both hollowed out, aching. May spoke first, her voice a low murmur. "He won. He burned the records. Calder has nothing." "He burned paper." Chayton said he did not burn the truth. She turned to him in the dark. She touched her cheek. The small, pale scar. In the church, when he said I was lonely, that I was compromised. He was right about the first part. It is a hard thing, to be the one no one looks at, to be the name they whisper. Chayton was quiet for a long time. He was looking at his hands, his knuckles raw and bleeding. "When I saw your locket," he said, his voice rough, "I was afraid. I was afraid of the promise I made to your mother. I have been failing promises my whole life. I failed to keep my brother safe. I failed a friend at San Carlos. I thought I would fail her, that I would fail you." May looked at him, at his strong, troubled profile in the gloom. "You did not fail. You came back. You stood on the roof. You stood in the church. You came through the storm. You did not fail me." He turned to face her. The space between them was small, just a few inches. He looked at her, his gaze steady, and he saw her. He saw the strength, the grit, the quiet, unshakable core. He said, "You are not what they call you. You are Sila's daughter, and you are May. You are the most useful person in this town, and you are the bravest." He raised his hand. He touched her face. His calloused fingers traced the line of her scar, from her cheek to the corner of her mouth. She did not pull away. She leaned into his touch, her eyes closing. He kissed her. It was not like the first, hesitant kiss by the fire. This was a kiss of shared survival, of truth spoken in the dark. It was deep, and it was slow, a mooring in the storm. It was a kiss that erased the names, the scars, the loneliness. May wrapped her arms around his neck, holding on, her body trembling. He held her close, his arms strong around her, shielding her from the wind, from the town, from the world. They stayed there, a long, silent time. Two survivors finding a different kind of shelter. The storm raged on, but in the small, dark shack, there was a profound, unshakable stillness. Later, the wind had died to a whisper. They sat side by side, leaning against the rough wood, her head on his shoulder. "He burned the ledgers," she said, the hard reality returning. "Calder's case is gone." "He burned his ledgers," Chayton corrected her, his voice firm. "But he did not burn the railroad map. He did not burn the surveyors. And he did not burn the town. The law is not the only justice." "May," she sat up, looking at him. "We have the people. We have the truth." He took her hand, his fingers lacing with hers. "We will use them both." She whispered, "I choose you, not because you are my guardian, but because you see me." He held her hand tightly. He said they chose each other. They chose each other for how they made each other strong. They would face Pike, not with the law, but with the community. The dust of the haboob had settled, but the air in Red Hollow remained thick, charged with an oppressive, granular tension. The fire at Old Man Toro's granary was a smoking, black wound on the edge of town. Sheriff Calder was a defeated man. He sat in his office, his hat on his desk, his face buried in his hands. Horace Pike had won. Calder had raced back to the bank only to find Pike standing calmly by a pot-bellied stove, a cup of coffee in his hand. The stove was roaring hot. Pike had smiled, a gesture of pure, reptilian calm. He had explained that, with the terrible events of the night, the arson, the kidnapping, he feared his records might be in danger. He had taken the liberty of burning all sensitive, non-essential files. For the town's protection, of course. The ledgers, the fraudulent contracts, the proof of May's payments, all of it was ash. Now, in the gray, gritty dawn, May, Chayton, and a pale but furious Aunt Bridget sat in Calder's office. Sister June was there, her hands folded, her presence a silent judgment. In the two adjoining cells, Elias Crow and Scully sat in sullen, defeated silence. "We have them," Calder said, his voice muffled. "We have Crow and Scully. We have them for arson, for the kidnapping." "But we do not have Pike," Sister June stated. It was not a question. Calder shook his head. "We have nothing. Hearsay. The word of two criminals against the most powerful man in the territory. Pike will claim they acted alone. He will say they were rogue employees. He will walk free, and the auction will proceed." He burned the proof. May felt the cold reality of it. They had survived the storm, the attack, the chase, only to be defeated by a stove. A heavy rumble sounded in the street. A 4-horse stagecoach, caked in mud, pulled up in front of the office. A man stepped out, tall and thin, wearing a long black coat and a stern expression. He moved with an impatient authority. He entered the office without knocking, stamping the dust from his boots. Sheriff Calder. Calder looked up. Startled? "Yes. I am Judge Silas Croft. My route to Silver City is flooded. I am stranded here until the creek goes down. I require your telegraph office and a secure place to review my cases." Calder stood, his chair scraping the floor. A circuit judge. Here, now. It was a miracle, a random act of nature like the tornado itself. "Judge," Calder said, his voice suddenly alive. "We have a situation here, a matter of extreme urgency." Croft looked at the occupants of the room, at the Apache man standing by the window, at the bandaged woman, at May, her face streaked with dust. He looked at the prisoners in the cells. "It seems you do." The town hall was a ruin, but its main room was large, and the roof had mostly held. By 10 that morning, it had been transformed. Judge Croft, a man who wasted no time, had declared a formal territorial hearing. He sat at a battered desk on the low stage, his gavel a simple wooden mallet. The entire town was there. They packed the benches, their faces a mixture of fear, anger, and a desperate, hungry curiosity. Horace Pike sat in the front row, his hands resting calmly on his knee. He looked like a victim, a man wronged by his employees, ready to help the law. The evidence chain was laid out. Sheriff Calder, his voice ringing with a new, borrowed authority, presented the case. First, the railroad map. It was laid on the desk, a plan for a water station at the Arroyo del Cielo, bearing the railroad's official seal. Pike stood. "Judge, may I?" he asked, his tone respectful. Croft nodded. "This was a proposal. Mr. Pike said smoothly, one of many, submitted by Mr. Crow, my ambitious foreman. I rejected it. It was too costly, and I felt it was not in the town's best interest." Elias Crow lunged at the bars of his cell, which had been dragged into the hall for the hearing. "You liar! It was your idea." Judge Croft banged the mallet. "Silence. Prisoner." Next, Calder called the two surveyors. They were pale, their hats twisting in their hands. They testified that Mr. Crow had hired them, had told them the land was already secured by the bank, and had insisted on secrecy. Pike simply nodded, his face a mask of sadness. "My employee, acting without my authority, a terrible misunderstanding, for which I am deeply sorry." Calder's face tightened. He presented the threatening note, the one that had been pinned to the eatery door by a knife. Pike scoffed gently. "Judge, this is a rough town, full of railroad workers and miners. This is a childish, cruel prank. It proves nothing." Calder was losing. The case was circumstantial. Pike was too smooth, too plausible. The sheriff played his last card. He pointed to the other cell. Scully, the tracker. He had spent the morning with Sister June, who had spoken to him not of the law, but of his soul. It had been effective. "Scully, tell the court what you told me," Calder commanded. Scully stood, his gaze fixed on the floor. He said Crow had hired him. He said Crow had given him orders. And who gave Mr. Crow the orders? Scully hesitated. He looked at Pike. Pike was smiling at him. A thin, cold smile that promised nothing but pain. "I do not know," Scully stammered. "I only ever talked to Crow." Calder's case collapsed. Pike had built a wall between himself and his actions. Elias Crow laughed from his cell, a harsh, barking sound. He was loyal, even now. He would take the fall, knowing Pike would pay for his silence later. "It is over," Pike said, rising. "Judge, I demand this farce be ended. I demand these slanders against my name be stricken. And I demand the legal, scheduled auction of the O'Rourke property proceed." Judge Croft looked at his papers. He looked at May. "Sheriff," he said, his voice flat, "the testimony is weak. The proof of conspiracy is non-existent. Barring new evidence, I must agree with Mr. Pike." May felt the blood drain from her face. She looked at Chayton. He stood against the back wall, his face a mask. He had done all he could. They had lost. She clutched the locket at her throat. It felt heavy, a useless weight. She thought of her mother. She thought of Chayton's promise, a guardian. He had guarded her, but he could not guard her from the law. She ran her thumb over the tarnished silver. She rubbed the carving, the 3 interlocking circles, the mark of the mountain cedar. She rubbed it hard, her nail digging into the grooves, her frustration a physical, burning thing. She felt a click. It was tiny, a faint, mechanical snap, no louder than a beetle cracking a seed. She looked down. Her thumb was pressed deep into the central carving. A tiny, hairline seam had opened on the inside of the locket, on the curved silver wall that held her mother's map. It was not the main hinge. It was something new, something hidden. Her heart stopped. She worked her fingernail into the seam. It was a false back, a secret compartment, hidden behind the map. "Judge," she said, her voice a dry whisper. Croft looked at her, his expression impatient. "Wait," May said, her voice stronger. "I have one more thing." Pike sighed, a theatrical gesture of boredom. More fantasies. Miss O'Rourke. May ignored him. She fumbled with the locket, her hands shaking. She pulled the map of the arroyo out. Behind it, she forced the tiny silver plate open. It popped free, revealing a small, dark hollow. Inside was a single, tiny, tightly folded piece of vellum, yellowed with age, sealed with a drop of brittle, black wax. The room was silent. She broke the seal with her thumbnail. She unfolded the document. It was covered in a fine, spidery handwriting. She began to read, her voice trembling, gaining strength with every word. "I, Father Michael O'Malley, of the Diocese of Santa Fe, in this year of our Lord, 1871, being of sound mind and authority." Pike, who had been sitting, stood up. His face was no longer calm. It was pale. May continued reading, her voice ringing in the hushed hall. "Do hereby recognize and affirm the traditional community rights to the spring known as the Arroyo del Cielo, or water that stays. These rights are granted by Spanish charter and confirmed by territorial law, to be held in trust for the common good of all citizens of Red Hollow." She paused, her breath catching, her eyes blurring with sudden, hot tears. "And I do appoint as administrator and guardian of this public trust." Pike took a step forward. "That is a forgery. It is not legal." "Mrs. Sila O'Rourke," May read, her voice breaking. "And in the event of her passing, this trust and its guardianship shall pass directly to the child of Sila, to be administered for the good of the people, in council with the acting sheriff of Red Hollow and the ranking official of the local mission." It was done. May looked up, the small paper rattling in her hand. Horace Pike was gray. He was staring at the paper as if it were a snake. Judge Croft, his eyes alight, stepped down from the platform. He took the document from May's hand. He examined the paper, the ink, the seal of the diocese. "Mr. Pike," Croft said, his voice cold as a winter morning. "You claim this is a forgery. On the contrary, I am well versed in territorial law, Spanish land grants, and their associated community water rights held by the church are ironclad. I have seen 2 such trusts upheld in Santa Fe this very year. This document, Mr. Pike, is perfectly, unequivocally valid." The room was a vacuum. No one spoke. The judge turned to the crowd. "What this means is that the water in the Arroyo del Cielo was never private property. It was never tied to Mr. Hollis's land or Mrs. O'Rourke's land. It belongs, and has always belonged, to the people of Red Hollow." Pike's entire scheme dissolved. The foreclosures, the land grab, it was all for nothing. He had tried to steal something that could not be sold. Elias Crow, from his cell, saw the game was over. He saw Pike's white, defeated face, his loyalty, bought and paid for, vanished. "He lied!" Crow roared, his voice rattling the bars. "He lied about everything. Pike knew. He knew about the locket. He called it that damned Irish charter. He told me to get it. He said it was the only thing that could stop him. He ordered the fire at Toro's. He ordered me to grab the old woman. And he burned those ledgers himself. I saw him. He said ashes tell no tales." The room exploded. It was a single, rising roar of pure communal rage. Men who had been signing Pike's papers 5 days ago were now calling for his blood. Judge Croft slammed the mallet. "Silence. Order." He looked at Horace Pike, who had collapsed into his chair, his face slick with sweat. The judge delivered his verdict. 1. The water right of the Arroyo del Cielo is valid. The spring is declared a community trust, to be administered, as per the document, by a board of 3, Miss May O'Rourke, Sister June, and Sheriff Calder. 2. All foreclosures, liens, and new contracts issued by the Red Hollow Bank against properties adjoining the Arroyo, specifically those of Bridget O'Rourke and Zeb Hollis, are declared null and void. 3. Elias Crow and his associate, Scully, are to be held in federal custody, to be tried for arson, kidnapping, and conspiracy. 4. He looked at Pike. Mr. Horace Pike. Based on the testimony of Mr. Crow, the physical evidence, and the clear, malicious intent to defraud an entire community and circumvent territorial law, I am remanding you to the custody of the sheriff. You will be held without bail to await the arrival of the territorial marshal. Sheriff Calder walked to the front row. He pulled the iron handcuffs from his belt. He took Pike by the arm, and for the first time, Pike did not resist. He was a broken man. The sound of the cuffs snapping shut was the loudest, most final sound Red Hollow had ever heard. As Pike was led away, the crowd parted. They did not cheer. They watched in a stunned, awed silence. May stood by the desk, her legs weak, her hand still holding the locket. People were looking at her, not whispering, looking. Mr. Henderson, the merchant, approached her. He did not look at her face. He looked at the floor. "Miss O'Rourke," he stammered. In the cellar, and in the market. I spoke harshly." He cleared his throat. "It was a good thing you did for the town." He nodded, a stiff, awkward gesture, and walked away. He had not said he was sorry, but he had called her Miss O'Rourke. Others just watched, their expressions unreadable. They were silent, embarrassed by their own weakness, by how quickly they had followed Pike, how quickly they had condemned her. It was not a perfect cinematic forgiveness. It was a real, awkward, human moment. May turned, looking for Chayton. He was standing with Judge Croft. The judge was shaking his hand. "Mr. Nietzsche, the court and this town are in your debt. Your testimony regarding your oath to Sila O'Rourke was honorable. Your actions were vital." He looked at the nervous faces of the townspeople. "Your place in this community is recognized. You are a resident of Red Hollow, with all the rights pertaining thereto." Sheriff Calder, his face showing relief for the first time in weeks, walked over. He clapped Chayton on the shoulder, a gesture that shocked the onlookers. "Judge is right," Calder said, "but I will do him one better. Mr. Nietzsche, this town nearly blew away, and we had another wind last night. We are fools when it comes to weather. I need to train a rescue team, a group that can handle storms. Read the signs. I need a man who knows the wind. I would be honored if you would accept a formal position, paid as the town's chief of storm safety." Chayton looked at Calder. He looked at the townspeople. Then his gaze found May. A small, almost imperceptible smile touched the corner of his mouth. He nodded at the sheriff. "I will stay." The ash from the bank stove settled over Red Hollow, a gray snow that coated the fresh pine coffins of the storm victims and the raw, new wood of the rebuilding. The arrest of Horace Pike had not solved the town's problems. It had only created a vacuum, a silence where the grinding machinery of greed had once been. Into this silence stepped the community. The first act of healing was not a prayer, it was labor. Old Man Toro had lost his granary to Pike's diversion. His seed grain turned to smoke. The town, in a collective, unspoken apology, descended on his small farm. Men who had looked at Toro as a relic now followed his direction. Zeb Hollis, his side wrapped tight, directed the lifting of new beams. They rebuilt the granary in 2 days, stronger than before, using wood salvaged from Pike's own abandoned railroad stores. Aunt Bridget, her arm healing, her spirit restored, opened the eatery. The front wall was still canvas, but the coffee was hot. She was sharp, she was loud, and she was the same as she had always been, a fixed point in the shifting, gritty world. Her recovery was a signal to the town that life was resuming. The largest project was the water. The new board of trustees, May O'Rourke, Sister June, and Sheriff Calder, organized the digging of the irrigation ditch from the Arroyo del Cielo. It was a massive undertaking, work that would change the valley forever. Chayton Nietzsche, in his new official capacity as the town's expert, planned the route. He walked the land not as a conqueror, but as a listener, finding the path of least resistance, the route that would carry the most water with the least effort. The men of the town followed him. They watched him. At first, they were wary. He was still Apache, but his knowledge was undeniable. He taught them how to read the land, how to brace the ditch against a sudden storm, how to respect the flow. Mr. Henderson, his hands soft from the dry goods store, found himself digging alongside Zeb Hollis. Men who had whispered about May in the church now worked beside her as she hauled water to the digging crews. The shared sweat, the common goal of bringing life to the dry valley, began to wash away the lines of prejudice. It was hard to hate a person whose back was straining next to yours for the same purpose. May had changed. The small, stifling attic room above the eatery was no longer her home. It was a cage she had left. She packed her few belongings, her mother's locket, her midwifery books, and a spare dress. She did not move far. She moved to the edge of the mesas, where Chayton kept the small herd of horses he was building. It was not a house. It was a patch of open land, sheltered by a stand of juniper. They lived in a canvas shelter, a temporary thing. But as May stood in the open air, the wind clean and sharp from the high desert, she felt a profound sense of peace. This was not a room of whispers. This was a home of sky. In the evenings, they worked on their permanent home. It was a small, simple structure, built of stone and sod. Its foundations laid deep. Chayton showed her how to mix the adobe, how to settle the stones. Their hands, side by side in the mud, were building a life. This was their chosen family, a foundation built of shared survival and quiet, mutual respect. One night, by the light of their small fire, May sat with a piece of paper and a bit of charcoal. She was not writing in a ledger. She was writing a letter. She wrote to Mr. Henderson. She did not accuse him. She did not scold him. She wrote that she understood that the storm had made everyone afraid. She wrote that she forged him for the words he had spoken in fear. But she also wrote that his words were his, not hers. She wrote that she would no longer carry the names he had given her. She informed him that her name was May O'Rourke, and that was what she would answer to. It was not a letter of reconciliation. It was a declaration of her own borders. She was, as Chayton had advised, choosing not to kneel before a name she had not chosen. She sealed it and left it for him. She never spoke of it again. The work on their new home was slow. One afternoon, Chayton and Zeb Hollis, his recovery almost complete, rode out to the wreckage of the old wind tower. It was a twisted skeleton of iron, a monument to the storm, but it was also the place May had tied her rope. It was the place they had truly met. They did not tear it all down. They salvaged one tall, 12-foot section of the iron lattice, bent and scarred by the wind. It was impossibly heavy. Working together, they hauled it back to their small plot of land. They raised it, setting it deep in the earth at the entrance to their pasture. It was not a monument to the destruction. It was a gatepost. It was a reminder that the worst winds could bring necessary change, a symbol that they would always read the sky, a piece of repaired history to welcome them home. The community, for its part, changed slowly. There was no grand celebration, no parade for the heroes. Pike was gone, but the habits of suspicion remained. Some families still kept their distance. They were polite to May, but their eyes were wary. They nodded to Chayton, but they did not speak to him. The healing was not complete. It was just beginning. Sister June, ever practical, decided to hasten it. The town needed a market, a place to gather that was not the saloon or the ruined bank. She organized an evening market, a night of lights, in the rebuilt town square. She hung lanterns and encouraged everyone to bring what they could trade. It was the water that brought them. The new ditch was flowing, and a trough was set up, the clear, sweet water from the Arroyo del Cielo, available to all. They came for the water, the most precious resource. But they stayed for the food. At a stall near the center, May O'Rourke stood behind a trestle table. She was not hiding. She was not a victim. She was serving fresh, hot corn cakes, made from grain donated by Old Man Toro. The interactions were small, awkward, and powerful. A woman who had whispered in the church that May was unclean now approached, her eyes downcast. She needed food for her children. May simply smiled, a genuine, open greeting. She handed the woman a stack of cakes, saying nothing of the past, only asking if she had enough. The woman took them, murmured a thank you, and hurried away. One by one, they came. They came for the life-giving water, and they were met with the life-sustaining food, given by the woman they had tried to cast out. She was not serving penance. She was serving her community. She was useful. The new structure of Red Hollow began to solidify. The long-term work began. Zeb Hollis and Chayton Naichi, their old dynamic gone, formed a partnership. They combined their skills, Zeb's knowledge of ranching and Chayton's deep understanding of the land. They began to breed the herd of storm-resistant horses, a business built on the future, not the past. May opened her own small clinic, a clean, bright room attached to the infirmary. Sister June had given her the space. It was a birthing room. May was no longer just an apprentice. She was the town midwife, a bringer of new life. Sheriff Calder, true to his word, formed the Red Hollow Weather Rescue Team. He asked Chayton to lead it. Chayton, in turn, recruited Zeb and other ranchers. He began training them, teaching them his skills, how to read the clouds, how to use ropes, how to survive when the sky turned yellow. That evening, May stood in her new, clean birthing room. The walls were whitewashed. A woman, the wife of one of the surveyors, was resting. She had just delivered a healthy baby girl. May washed her hands in a basin. She caught her reflection in the small piece of mirror glass hanging on the wall. She stopped, looking at herself. The light was dim. The scar on her cheek was visible, a pale thread against her skin. The town's standard of beauty had not changed. She did not look in the mirror and see a pretty woman. But she was different. Her shoulders were straight. She no longer hunched. as if to make herself smaller. Her eyes were not downcast. They were bright, clear, and direct. They were the eyes of a woman who knew her own name. She did not see beauty. She saw strength. She saw May. And for the first time, it was enough. The spring at Arroyo del Cielo was no longer a secret, nor was it a battleground. It was a source. The water bubbled clear and cold from the sandstone. Its sound, a constant, quiet promise in the canyon. This was where they chose to make their vows. It was not a wedding, not in any way Red Hollow would have recognized. There was no preacher, no church, no white dress. It was a ceremony of place, a simple acknowledgement. The witnesses were the new foundation of the town. Sheriff Calder stood near the pool, his hat in his hands, his badge gleaming, his presence giving the act the weight of the law. Sister June stood beside him, her face calm and bright. She held a small, worn book. Old Man Toro sat on a flat rock, his ancient guitar resting on his knee, his fingers gently finding a slow, simple melody that seemed to be drawn from the sound of the water itself. May O'Rourke wore her clean, patched calico dress. Chayton Naichi wore the simple leather and cloth of his daily life. They stood at the edge of the pool, facing each other, the water flowing past their feet. Sister June stepped forward. She did not open her book to scripture. She read from a page of her own thoughts, her voice clear in the canyon. She said that we are all like this land. We are dry, and we are cracked, and we wait for what will save us. She said that some believe salvation is a great, booming thunder from the sky. But more often, she said, it is a quiet spring, hidden under the rock, waiting for a storm to break it free. It is a spring, she said, that finds its purpose not in its source, but in the community it flows toward. She looked at May, and then at Chayton. You have both been storms, and you have both been the spring. You have broken this town open, and now you will help it live. Old Man Toro's music swelled, a soft, hopeful chord. There were no rings. Rings were metal. A sign of ownership, a cold circle. Chayton held out his hand. He held a single, long, braided cord of dark horsehair, strong and flexible. May held out her own, a cord of 3 strands of leather. One strand dyed a faint blue with indigo. One left the natural tan, and one stained deep red from the clay of the arroyo. They did not exchange them. They tied them, each to the other's wrist. Chayton tied his cord to May's hand. May tied her cord to his. The knots were strong, the kind a rider uses, meant to hold against a hard pull, but able to be undone with a practiced touch. It was not a bond of permanence. It was a bond of daily, chosen partnership. Sheriff Calder stepped forward. As the senior officer of the law in this territory, he said, his voice formal, I recognize this union. As a friend, I honor it. He was the first to shake Chayton's hand and the first to kiss May on the cheek. The act was public, a final, definitive statement to any who still held doubts. Their new house was built. It was a simple, sturdy thing of stone and sod, dug partway into the low slope of the mesa, protected from the wind. It had one large room, a deep fireplace, and a solid plank door. The wind tower gate, their salvaged piece of iron lattice, stood guard at the path, its metal already starting to rust a deep, beautiful red, a color that matched the cliffs behind it. May was arranging their few possessions. She had a shelf, built by Chayton, of smooth cottonwood. She took the locket, her mother's locket, from around her neck. She held it in the palm of her hand, the silver warm. It was her history. It held the map that had saved them, and the hidden charter that had freed the town. It was the proof of her mother's love, and the token of Chayton's promise. For her entire life, it had been a weight, a secret, a symbol of what she lacked, of the bad luck the town had named. Now, it was a tool, its purpose served. She opened a small wooden box, one that had held Sister June's surgical thread. She placed the locket inside, coiling the leather cord. She closed the lid and set it on the shelf. She was not burying it. She was honoring it. It was a story she would tell, a piece of their foundation, but it would no longer control her. She would not be defined by the secrets of the past, but by the work of the present. The work was ongoing. The new Board of Trustees for the Arroyo del Cielo Spring held its first formal meeting. It was not in the church or the ruined town hall. It was in the eatery. Aunt Bridget serving coffee to all. The entire community was invited. A large, new map was spread on the table. It was the future of Red Hollow. It showed the main canal, already flowing. It showed the new community garden, a patch of green that was Old Man Toro's new project. It showed the wide, fenced pasture where Chayton and Zeb's herd of storm horses grazed. Sister June brought the meeting to order. She presented the community compact, a new charter for the town. It was a single page. It declared that the water was a shared right, that no single person could ever own it. It set out the rules for its use, a fair portion for every family, for every farm. But there was one last piece of business: the railroad. The company, its plans for a monopoly broken, had sent a new agent. He was a quiet man, not a bully like Crow. He had made a new offer. They still needed water. They were willing to buy it, at a fair price, from the town's trust. The money would fund a school, a real doctor, a new town hall. The town was tempted. It was an easy salvation. May stood. She was a trustee now. Her voice was quiet, but it carried. She looked at Chayton, who stood by the wall, watching. She said that the railroad was welcome, but it was a guest. It could not harm the land. She proposed an amendment to the compact. The railroad could buy surplus water, but only after every home and every farm had its fill. And the first sign of damage to the arroyo, the first hint that the spring was suffering, the taps would be shut. Zeb Hollis seconded the motion. Mr. Henderson, his face thoughtful, seconded it as well. The compact was signed by every head of household, starting with May O'Rourke and ending with Old Man Toro, who made his mark, a simple, strong X. The new map was hung in the eatery, where the auction notice had once been. The future was pinned to the wall for all to see. Children, who had been huddled in cellars and ruins for weeks, now had a place to play. They had the gardens, and they had the new, clean flow of water in the ditch, their favorite place. However, was the new pasture. They would race to the gate, the great, twisted piece of the iron wind tower, and dare each other to touch it. It was their own monument, a piece of the storm they had all survived. They ran through it, their laughter a new sound in the valley. The sun was setting, painting the high mesas in shades of violet and deep orange. The evening wind was rising. It was a new wind, cool and clean, carrying the scent of damp earth from the new canal, and the smell of cedar smoke from their new chimney. May stood by the gate, watching the light fade. Chayton was finishing his work with the horses, his movements slow and rhythmic, a quiet partnership with the animals. May heard a sound, faint, from the main street. It was a man's voice, a cowboy from one of the outlying ranches, his tongue loosened by drink at the saloon. He was recounting the story of the hearing. And May heard the name, the old, familiar slur, carried on the wind. Ugly May. She stopped. She listened. The name floated in the air, a piece of dust from the past, a ghost of an old pain. She found herself smiling, a small, private, genuine smile. The name had no power. It was just a sound. It had nothing to do with her. From the new cabin built for the surveyor and his family, another sound came, a baby's cry, followed by a woman's call. Auntie May, come look. Emma is trying to stand. The voice was clear, and it was strong. It was the surveyor's wife, the woman May had delivered, the baby, Emma, the first child born in the new Red Hollow. Auntie May, that was her name, the one she had earned, the one that mattered. Chayton came up behind her, his day's work done. He did not speak. He just rested his hand on her shoulder. A simple, solid weight. A reminder. She was not alone. She had ground to stand on. She leaned into his touch. They stood together for a moment, watching the last of the light paint the valley. Then they turned and walked through the gate of the broken tower, toward their new home. May opened the solid plank door. The fire was lit inside. A warm, orange glow in the small, safe room. They stepped inside, out of the wind. The door closed, a solid, quiet sound. Outside, the new wind of the high desert whistled through the iron lattice of the gate. But inside, the room was still. Red Hollow was not a paradise. It was not a town magically healed of all its scars. But the wind had finally, truly, changed direction. Thank you for listening to our story. We invite you to comment below with where you are listening from, so we can all connect. Please subscribe to our channel, Wild West Tales. Like this video, and give it a boost by pressing the hype button so this tale can be shared with even more listeners.